Usually, when we talk about diagnosing a problem, there's this expectation of, precision.
Right, like a binary thing.
Exactly. Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line and the doctor just points to the screen. It's broken or it's not.
Yeah, a highly comforting, visible reality.
But the moment you step into the world of human social dynamics, and specifically the mechanics of power, that x-ray machine just totally
Oh,
shatters.
completely. The landscape is profoundly counterintuitive.
It really is. I mean, think about it. From the day we're born, we're fed this steady diet of individualism,
Be yourself.
right? Speak your truth, let your freak flag fly, all of that. But if we turn to Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, and we're looking specifically at Law 38 today, we run into this, frankly, terrifying proposition.
That total authenticity in public is actually a trap.
Yeah. So that's the core premise we are unpacking for you in today's deep dive. We're looking at why flaunting your uniqueness or, your unconventional ideas almost always invites punishment from the group.
And how mastering the art of the outward mask is, well, it's perhaps the only way to really protect your inner intellectual freedom.
Which is wild. It forces a complete reevaluation of how we view conformity, right? Because we naturally assume that hiding our true thoughts is, I don't know, a form of cowardice.
Yeah, it feels like submission to most people.
Exactly. But the source text posits that camouflage is actually the ultimate form of dominance. It's the armor that protects the mind.
And to understand why that armor is necessary, we have to look at this fundamental, often really uncomfortable truth about human nature,
Which is?
that complete free expression is basically a social impossibility.
Yeah.
And that's because people don't hold their beliefs logically.
We hold them emotionally.
Right. Deeply emotionally.
Which fundamentally changes all the rules of engagement for you. I mean, if someone holds an idea just as a logical premise, you can sit down and debate it.
Sure, you offer facts, you point to a spreadsheet.
Yeah, and they might actually adjust their worldview. But because beliefs are so deeply wrapped up in a person's identity, their daily habits, their sense of security, presenting a counter-argument isn't received as just, a different option.
No, it's felt viscerally, like a personal attack on their very foundation.
Right. Disagreement just ceases to be a polite debate and morphs into a personal condemnation.
The human brain literally perceives a challenge to its belief system with the exact same neurochemical alarm bells as a physical threat to the body.
Wow. So it's literally fight or flight.
Exactly. When you challenge the orthodoxy of a group, you're introducing uncertainty.
Yeah.
And groups absolutely despise uncertainty.
Yeah, they do.
There's this brilliant quote in the text from the 17th century philosopher Balthasar Gracian that captures this perfectly.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, he wrote, "Truth is for the few, error is as usual as it is vulgar." Gratian noted that the wise man isn't recognized by what he says in the marketplace. Because in the marketplace, he speaks not with his own voice, but with the voice of, quote, universal folly.
Universal folly. Let me put it this way, just to kind of ground Gratian's philosophy in something everyone listening has probably experienced.
Go for it.
Imagine you're the only person at this highly celebratory dinner, let's say a massive wedding rehearsal or a big corporate promotion dinner, right?
Okay, setting the scene.
And you refuse to drink alcohol. Now, you don't have to say a single word. You don't have to stand up and deliver some sermon about the virtues of temperance.
Right, you're just sitting there.
Yeah, you just sit there quietly sipping your sparkling water. Almost instantly, the rest of the group feels judged by your difference.
Oh, 100%.
Your mere act of abstaining feels like this high-powered spotlight aimed directly at their indulgence. You become this living, breathing condemnation of what everyone else is doing just by existing differently in that space.
And that is the exact psychological mechanism at play here. Your visible difference makes them question their own choices.
And that discomfort quickly turns into resentment.
It does. The text introduces a very potent image to illustrate this. The black sheep. The herd shuns the black sheep because they are uncertain if it truly belongs with them. Consequently, the black sheep straggles behind.
It wanders away from the safety of the collective.
Yeah, and the inevitable result is that it gets cornered by wolves and devoured. The lesson drawn from this is that safety resides in numbers. You absolutely must keep your differences confined to your thoughts and not display them in your fleece.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept of the fleece. Because, we recognize the social penalty of being the black sheep today.
Like getting uninvited to parties.
Yeah, or facing a massive backlash on social media. But to understand the true evolutionary mechanism behind this law, We really have to look at what happens when the stakes are literal survival.
Right, how ancient societies dealt with nonconformity.
Exactly. Which takes us to the battlefields of ancient Greece, specifically around 478 BC.
We're looking at the city-state of Sparta here. This is shortly after the Greek forces had miraculously repelled a massive invasion from the Persian Empire.
Talk about a high-stress environment.
Tensions are incredibly high, but there's also this surging sense of Greek pride. So the Spartans send an expedition to continue pushing the Persians back.
And this force is led by a young Spartan nobleman named Pausanias.
Right.
And Pausanias is essentially a rock star at this moment in history. He's revered by both the Athenians and the Spartans.
A fearless, highly capable military commander.
Yeah, with a real flair for the dramatic. With astonishing speed, Pausanias and his troops capture Cyprus, and then they advance to the Hellespont to capture Byzantium, which is modern-day Istanbul.
Virtually overnight, this Spartan soldier becomes the master of a significant chunk of the Persian Empire.
And this is where the behavioral shift occurs, right? Because Pausanias is stationed in Byzantium, far, far away from the strict, notoriously brutal lifestyle of Sparta.
Yeah, Spartan culture was defined by its austerity.
Oh, totally. The Agorage training system, the cold baths, the terrible food, the constant grueling military drilling.
Right. And suddenly, he's surrounded by the immense wealth and sensual pleasure of the conquered Persians.
And he begins to change his fleece. He starts appearing in public wearing these flowing Persian robes.
He begins putting elaborate pomades and perfumes in his hair.
He dismisses his traditional Spartan guards and surrounds himself with an exotic bodyguard of Egyptians.
It's a total cultural and physical transformation. He starts hosting these incredibly lavish banquets, demanding to be entertained with music and luxury in the Persian manner.
He even cuts off his old Spartan friends.
Yeah. Rumors even begin to circulate that he's secretly communicating with the Persian King Xerxes.
He effectively transforms into a Persian dictator. Now, let me play devil's advocate here because I think anyone listening might have this exact thought.
Sure.
I look at this story and I think, wait, isn't he just falling in love with a new culture?
It looks like that, yeah.
Right. He grew up in an environment of total deprivation. He goes to Persia, experiences fine silk and sensual pleasure for the first time, and he embraces it. Isn't this just the ancient equivalent of someone doing a semester abroad in Italy and coming back with a newfound love for espresso and a slightly pretentious wardrobe?
That's a great comparison.
So why did the Spartans view this adoption of local customs as an offense worthy of the death penalty?
Well, to the modern eye, it certainly looks like a simple case of a traveler enjoying the perks of a new environment. But if we connect this to the deeper psychology of power dynamics,
Right.
flaunting a foreign culture in front of your own people is never merely about loving the new. It is a profound, unmistakable display of contempt for the old.
Contempt. Wow. So it's not about the silk robes themselves. It's about what the silk robes say about the rough wool the Spartans are wearing.
Precisely that. When Pausanias applied those perfumes and draped himself in Persian fashion, he was signaling a deliverance from Greek discipline.
He was using the outward appearance of exoticism to forcefully separate himself from the common Greek soldier.
Yes. His behavior communicated a very specific message. He was basically saying, I have evolved past your simple, primitive, ascetic ways. I am fundamentally superior to you.
And because we established that people hold their beliefs emotionally, the Spartan soldiers didn't look at his robes and think, oh, the textile work on that garment is fascinating.
No, not at all.
They looked at his robes and felt a visceral insult to everything they stood for.
Exactly. The historian Thucydides actually wrote about this very dynamic. He noted that by his contempt for the laws and his imitation of foreign ways, Pausanias made himself widely suspected of being unwilling to abide by normal standards.
Right. Cultures possess norms that reflect centuries of shared beliefs.
Shared blood, shared sacrifices, shared ideals. You cannot scoff at those foundational pillars with impunity.
The text makes it very clear. A society will punish that kind of flaunting.
Always. And the punishment is always isolation. And in the brutal calculus of power, isolation equates to total powerlessness.
Which is exactly how the tragedy of Pausanias unfolds. The Spartan authorities hear about his behavior. They suspect he's gone mad with power or is committing treason, so they strip him of his command.
They recall him to Sparta.
Yeah, but he refuses to learn his lesson. He returns to Sparta, literally the most austere city on the planet, and he continues to parade around in the Persian style. It becomes almost pathological at this point.
He had become completely addicted to the psychological high of superiority that the exotic clothes provided him.
Wow.
He eventually sneaks back to the Hellespont under the guise of continuing the fight, but the Spartans declare him a public enemy.
They arrest him and put him on trial.
And during this trial, a clear pattern emerges of his constant disrespect for his fellow Greeks.
Right, like erecting monuments in his own name rather than honoring the cities that fought alongside him.
Openly mocking their traditions.
Astonishingly, though, because of his high birth status, he actually survives the trial. They let him go.
Yeah, you would think a near-death experience with the Spartan justice system would teach him to lay low.
You would think. But instead, he hires a messenger to take a secret letter to Xerxes.
But the messenger is a loyalist to Sparta.
Yep. He takes the letter straight to the authorities, setting up one of the most cinematic and grim downfalls in ancient history.
It really is. The Spartan authorities require irrefutable proof, so they instruct the messenger to arrange a clandestine meeting with Pausanias inside a sacred temple.
And the authorities hide themselves behind a partition and listen.
And what they hear shocks them to their core. They had never heard such brazen, unvarnished contempt for Spartan ways spoken by one of their own citizens.
Pausanias lets the mask slip entirely and unloads his true, venomous feelings about his homeland.
He signs his own death warrant with that monologue.
Literally. He realizes he's been overheard and flees to another sacred temple to claim sanctuary.
And the Spartans are bound by religious law not to forcibly drag him out.
Right, that would be a crime against the gods. So they opt for a loophole that is arguably much, much worse.
They surround the temple, they place sentries at every exit, and they simply wait.
They keep him trapped inside until he literally starves to death.
It is a horrific end, but it perfectly encapsulates the ruthless judgment of Law 38.
Yeah. By flaunting his unorthodox ways, he made his own people feel deeply inferior, and they engineered a way to destroy him.
The siren call of the exotic is lethal. If you flaunt your pleasure in alien ways of thinking, you're revealing a motive to demonstrate superiority over your fellows.
And the herd will inevitably turn on you.
Always.
That is the ultimate cautionary tale. If you flaunt your true unconventional thoughts, you end up starving in a temple.
Right.
But that brings us to a deeply problematic question. If starvation or execution is the punishment for expressing difference, what is the alternative?
What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do when your actual internal beliefs are fundamentally, irreconcilably incompatible with the society you live in? Are we forced to become mindless drones, internally suppressing our own intellect just to survive?
That is the pivotal question at the heart of this strategy, and the answer is that you do not become a drone. You become a master of camouflage. You learn to wear the mask.
And to see how this is executed at the absolute highest level of stakes, we have to jump forward in history, right?
We do. To the Counter-Reformation in late 16th century Italy.
Talk about an environment where the stakes are unfathomably high. I mean, this is the era of the Inquisition.
It is.
This is a time when having the wrong thought doesn't just get you socially ostracized, it gets you tied to a stake and set on fire.
Right. And we are looking at the life of a Dominican monk and philosopher named Tommaso Campanella.
Campanella. And he was an incredibly brilliant thinker.
Absolutely brilliant. But he had the immense misfortune of living in the absolute worst possible time and place to be a free thinker.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church was violently crushing any deviation from strict orthodoxy. This is the exact same machinery of the Inquisition that would later target Galileo.
Wow. But Campanella's ideas were arguably even more radical.
They were. He was a follower of the materialist doctrine of the ancient Roman philosopher Epicurus.
Okay, to put that in perspective for the listener, what does it actually mean to be an Epicurean materialist under the Pope's nose in the 16th century?
It means he completely rejected the supernatural.
Whoa.
Yeah. He did not believe in miracles, he did not believe in the existence of heaven, and he did not believe in hell.
Okay, that is extremely dangerous for that era.
Even more dangerously, he wrote that the church had actively promoted these superstitions for centuries purely as a mechanism to control the common folk.
Keeping them docile through a state of perpetual fear.
Exactly.
He is essentially calling the entire theological and political power structure of the 16th century world a manipulative fraud.
Yes, he is. And early in his life, he does not keep these thoughts hidden in his mental coffer.
He expresses them openly.
He does. And naturally, the Inquisition comes for him.
Of course.
In 1593, they throw him into prison for heresy. He actually manages to secure a brief partial release 6 years later.
Oh, wow.
But he immediately involves himself in a utopian plot to overthrow the Spanish rulers of southern Italy.
He just couldn't help himself. He possessed an incredible intellect, but zero outward filter.
None. His internal convictions drove him to reckless action. So, he's imprisoned once again. But this time, the Spanish and Italian inquisitors are determined to discover the true depth of his impious beliefs.
They need a formal confession of heresy.
Yes. And to extract it, they subject him to a horrific, specialized form of torture known as lavilia.
Okay, we need to slow down and describe lavilia for a second, because understanding the physical terror of this really informs the sheer psychological brilliance of what Campanella does next.
It's brutal.
The victim is suspended by their arms, which are tied behind their back, forcing them into this hovering, squatting position.
Right.
And they are suspended just a few inches above a seat that is thickly studded with razor-sharp spikes.
And the human body simply cannot sustain that muscular tension for long. Your quadriceps and shoulders inevitably give out from exhaustion.
And when they do...
When they do, your body weight drops you down onto the spikes, which tear into your flesh.
Good Lord.
It's a torture designed specifically to bypass pain tolerance and break the mind through agonizing, prolonged physical exhaustion. You are essentially torturing yourself through gravity and muscle failure.
It's just horrifying. But it's while he is hovering over these spikes, facing this unspeakable persecution, that Campanella finally has his grand epiphany about power.
He realizes that martyrdom serves absolutely no purpose.
Right. He knows with absolute certainty that he's never going to genuinely renounce his true beliefs. His mind is set.
But he finally understands that he must completely disguise their outward appearance if he wants to survive and continue his work.
And this realization sparks a three-part strategic pivot that allows him to save his own life, eventually free himself from a dark dungeon, and most importantly, continue expressing his controversial beliefs right under the noses of his captors.
It's brilliant.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this three-step plan is a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
Step 1. He feigns madness.
He suddenly alters his behavior to act as though his heretical beliefs stem from an uncontrollable medical unsoundness of mind.
The text points out that in the context of the Inquisition, this is the equivalent of disavowing moral responsibility.
It's akin to a modern criminal blaming their terrible actions entirely on a traumatic childhood or a neurological defect.
Exactly. He is communicating to the Inquisitors, it's not my fault I think this way. My brain is simply broken.
And the torturers are highly suspicious, right? They actually keep the torture going for a while just to see if he breaks character.
They do. He must have possessed an unfathomable well of resolve to maintain the act of a babbling madman while his muscles were tearing over the spikes.
Seriously. But the performance works. By 1603, his sentence is commuted from execution to life in prison.
He spends the first several years chained to a wall in a damp underground dungeon. But he is alive.
And crucially, because they view him as a broken madman rather than a dangerous heretic, they eventually allow him access to writing materials.
Which sets the stage for step 2. He is no longer foolish enough to express his materialist ideas directly.
No. Instead, he authors a book titled The Hispanic Monarchy.
And this text is a complete 180-degree turn from everything he actually believes. It aggressively promotes the idea that Spain has a divine, God-given mission to expand its power around the globe.
He even includes highly practical Machiavellian advice for the Spanish king on how to conquer more territory and subjugate populations.
It's the ultimate kiss-up document.
It really is. He's writing a brilliant propaganda manual for the very regime that tortured him and locked him in a dungeon.
It was a massive, calculated ploy. It was an attempt to broadcast his total conversion to orthodoxy in the boldest, most public manner conceivable.
And he knew the censors would read it.
Oh, he counted on it. And the psychology of his flattery worked flawlessly.
In 1626, after spending decades locked away, the Pope reads his writings, is convinced of his rehabilitation, and finally orders Campanella to be set free.
He plays the long game. He survives the Inquisition by wearing the fleece of a Spanish imperialist.
But step 3 is what elevates Campanella from a mere survivor to a legendary strategist. Shortly after securing his freedom, he writes a new book called Atheism Conquered.
And the execution of Atheism Conquered is just staggering in its brilliance.
Yeah.
On the surface, the book is exactly what its title suggests. It appears to be a passionate defense of the Catholic Church, actively attacking freethinkers, Machiavellians, Calvinists, and heretics.
He structures it as a formal debate. You have the heretics expressing their anti-religious beliefs on one side, and those beliefs are countered by arguments for the superiority of Catholicism on the other.
To the censors reviewing it for publication, it looks like Campanella is just writing another tedious book defending the church.
Right, he's setting up the atheists just to knock them down. But when you actually read the text of the debate,
When you analyze the text, the subversive nuance is incredible. Campanella gives the heretics the absolute best arguments.
wow.
The words he puts in the mouths of the freethinkers are vibrant, intellectually fresh, and argued with striking, genuine passion.
They're brief, logical, and incredibly eloquent.
He is essentially summarizing the exact perfect case against Catholicism, using his own brilliant mind to articulate the Epicurean worldview.
And then, when it's time for the Catholic side of the debate to respond, the side he's ostensibly championing to prove his loyalty, his writing suddenly becomes terrible.
Yes, he deliberately resorts to stale, boring cliches. The theological rationales he provides for the church are incredibly convoluted, dry, and difficult to follow.
The arguments defending Catholicism drag on for pages, and they seem utterly tiresome and profoundly unconvincing when juxtaposed with the sharp, piercing logic he gave to the heretics.
It is a philosophical Trojan horse.
To put this in modern terms, it's like writing a company-wide corporate memo praising the CEO's disastrous new business strategy.
Oh, I like this analogy.
But you make the praise so drippingly sarcastic, so over the top, and outline the flaws so perfectly within your quote-unquote praise that every ground-level employee reading it realizes it's actually a scathing critique.
Right. Meanwhile, the oblivious CEO just reads the headline and thinks you're their biggest fan.
Exactly. Campanella packaged his true, highly dangerous beliefs inside this giant wooden idol of the prevailing orthodoxy. He rolled it right through the front gates of the Vatican, and the censors were paralyzed.
They felt disturbed by the text. They sensed it was ambiguous, but they couldn't legally ban it.
And they certainly couldn't throw him back in prison, because technically, strictly speaking, the book was a defense of Catholicism.
He was utilizing the exact same arguments the church used. He was just deliberately presenting them poorly. It's an ancient and immensely powerful trick.
You pretend to disagree with dangerous ideas, but in the course of your disagreement, you actually give those ideas expression and massive public exposure.
You conform to the prevailing orthodoxy on the surface, but those who possess the intellect to read between the lines understand the irony.
The ultimate proof of his success is what happened to the book after his death. Years later, atheism conquered, became an absolute Bible for atheists, libertines, and freethinkers across Europe.
They completely ignored the bloated Catholic responses.
They just memorized the brilliant, concise arguments Campanella had put in the mouths of the heretics to defend their own dangerous ideas.
He achieved outward conformity, saved his own life, and still managed to transmit his true beliefs to everyone who mattered.
He proved that martyrdom is a failure of imagination.
It is far better to live on in an oppressive world, even to thrive in it, while finding a way to express your ideas subtly to the tolerant few.
If you lay your pearls before swine, they will only trample them and turn to attack you.
Pearls before swine. That captures the defensive posture perfectly.
But let's pull this forward, because most of you listening aren't facing the rack or the Inquisition. What does this mean for the average person?
Right. How do we apply this?
Yeah, how do we apply this Trojan horse concept to the modern daily grind?
Well, if we connect this to the everyday human experience, it's about recognizing that every single society, every corporate workplace, every industry, and even every family unit has its own deeply entrenched set of dogmas.
Sir Walter Raleigh actually offered a brilliant architectural metaphor for this. He said, "Wise men should be like coffers with double bottoms, which, when others look into, being opened, they see not all that they hold."
I love that visual.
A treasure chest with a false bottom. You open the lid, you show the world the bold coins on top, your conventional opinions, your polite agreements, your appropriate work attire, and society thinks they've seen everything inside you.
They feel safe.
But underneath that false wood, hidden away, you keep the real treasure, your actual unvarnished thoughts and radical ideas.
But we have to acknowledge that carrying this double bottom around every single day carries a significant psychological weight.
It can feel incredibly isolating to constantly perform a version of yourself.
It can. And to truly understand the emotional reality of living this law, we need to examine a parable from the Sufi tradition penned by Idris Shah.
Oh, the tale of the waters.
Yes, it is a deeply haunting story.
It really is. It begins with Khidr, the legendary Sufi teacher, issuing a dire warning to all of humanity. He proclaims that on a specific approaching date, all the water in the world is going to dry up and disappear.
And when the water eventually returns, It will be a different kind of water.
Crucially, anyone who drinks this new water will be driven completely mad.
Out of the entirety of mankind, only one man actually heeds the warning. He meticulously gathers as much of the old safe water as he can, stores it in a secure mountain retreat, and waits for the prophecy to unfold.
And the day arrives. The streams and rivers dry up, then the new water flows in. The man stays safely in his cave and drinks his stored water.
But the rest of humanity drinks the new water.
And just as Kidder predicted, they all go mad. They begin thinking, talking, and behaving in an entirely different, irrational way.
But the terrifying detail is this. The madness includes a total amnesia of the warning.
They don't realize they're mad.
No. To them, their new chaotic reality feels perfectly normal and logical.
So the sane man eventually comes down from his mountain retreat. He attempts to interact with his fellow humans.
But when he tries to communicate with them, using logic, reason, and the old way of thinking, they look at him as if he is insane.
They show him hostility, or perhaps worse, deep pity. Because they are the vast majority, they genuinely believe he's the one who has lost his mind.
Because he's the black sheep. He's the only one not partaking in the universal folly.
At first, he refuses to assimilate. He keeps retreating back to his cave, drinking his sane water, desperately trying to hold on to objective reality.
But eventually the sheer crushing weight of the isolation breaks his spirit.
The punchline of the fable is devastating. The loneliness of being the only sane person, of constantly behaving and thinking differently from everyone else, becomes so utterly unbearable that the man finally surrenders.
He voluntarily drinks the mad water.
He becomes just like the rest of them.
And society rejoices. His fellow citizens look at him, embrace him, and celebrate that this poor madman has miraculously been restored to sanity.
Wow. Let's bring this directly to your life as a listener. How often do you find yourself tempted to drink the mad water just to survive your week?
Right. You're sitting in a corporate strategy meeting, and the CEO is pitching some synergistic, paradigm-shifting initiative that factually and mathematically makes absolutely zero sense.
Or you're sitting at a family Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle is going on a passionate rant based on a completely fabricated internet rumor.
The immediate instinct of any intelligent person is to be the same man. The instinct is to stand up, stop the meeting, and say, no, that is not true. Here are the actual facts.
But if you do that, you are Pausanias flaunting his Persian robes. You're publicly making them feel intellectually inferior.
You shatter their reality, and you instantly become the enemy of the group.
So what is the solution? Do we just drink the mad water, lose our minds, and agree with the terrible corporate strategy?
Well, the solution is the double-bottomed coffer. You sip the mad water in public, but you meticulously maintain your stash of sane water in your mental cave.
The 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer actually offered the ultimate practical framework for navigating these exact situations.
Oh, I love his advice here.
He advised, never combat any man's opinion, for though you reach the age of Methuselah, you would never have done setting him right upon all the absurd things that he believes.
He is observing that humanity is infinitely capable of believing profound nonsense, and you literally do not have enough years in your lifespan to fix them all.
It's a mathematical impossibility.
It is impossible to mend their beliefs, but it is incredibly easy to offend their egos. So Schopenhauer suggests a mental detachment trick.
Okay, what is it?
When you are forced to sit in that corporate meeting or at that Thanksgiving table and listen to absurd remarks, do not internalize it and do not get angry. Instead, imagine that you are sitting in the audience of a theater, watching a dialogue between two fools in a comedy play.
You detect, you turn the universal folly into entertainment.
Exactly.
You don't validate their ideas internally, but you also don't attack them outwardly. You just observe the absurdity of the human condition.
And historically, entire communities have survived generations of persecution using this exact psychological detachment.
Like the Moranos in Spain.
Yes. In the late 14th century, the Spanish crown initiated a massive, brutal persecution of the Jewish population. Many fled, but those who remained were forced, under threat of death, to convert to Catholicism.
The stakes are identical to Campanella's: convert or be murdered.
Over the next 300 years, the Spanish authorities noticed a deeply disturbing trend. These converts, who were derogatorily referred to as Moranos, were living their outward lives as perfect, exemplary Catholics.
Many of them attained high government offices, they married into Spanish nobility, and they gave every outward appearance of intense Christian piety.
But underneath the false bottom of the coffin.
Underneath, they had somehow managed to retain their true Jewish faith. They were practicing their religion in extreme secrecy, passing the traditions down through generations behind closed doors.
And the Spanish Inquisition was largely commissioned specifically to ferret out these secret practitioners.
But for centuries, the Marranos mastered the art of dissimulation.
They did. They would liberally display large crucifixes in their homes. They would give massive, highly publicized financial gifts to the local churches.
They would even occasionally and calculatedly make anti-Semitic remarks in public spaces just to throw off the scent of the inquisitors.
Which is horrifying to contemplate, having to actively disparage your own people just to survive.
But it illustrates the absolute terrifying length they had to go to in order to protect their inner sanctum.
They recognized a fundamental truth. In society, outward appearances are the only things that matter to the herd.
Because the herd doesn't have telepathy. They only judge the fleece.
If you stick to conventional appearances in public, if you act as the most zealous advocate of the prevailing orthodoxy, no one will ever suspect that you hold a completely different reality in private.
They maintained their inner spiritual freedom by perfectly, flawlessly performing the outer slavery.
It serves as the ultimate historical proof of Law 38. You do not change the world or protect your lineage by dying pointlessly for your beliefs in a town square.
You change the world by surviving, attaining positions of power within the system, and vigorously protecting your inner truth.
Right.
Okay, I follow the logic perfectly. I see how this structural camouflage works in 16th century Italy with Campanella, and I see how it worked for the Marranos under the terror of the Spanish Inquisition.
Sure.
But I have to push back here because I think a lot of modern listeners might be feeling a sense of chronological snobbery.
Okay.
They might be thinking, well, sure, in the Dark Ages, under religious zealots, you had to hide. But we live in the modern era. We live in a society that specifically claims to value innovation, disruption, and the bold rule breakers.
Right, the Silicon Valley mindset.
Yeah. Surely, in fields like modern science, tech, or the arts, we actively reward people who smash the orthodoxy and loudly speak their truth.
Well, it's a very comforting, very modern thought, but it is dangerously naive. It is a fatal error to imagine that the old orthodoxies have vanished simply because we carry smartphones and work in sterile laboratories.
Really?
The orthodoxies haven't disappeared. They have merely changed their clothes. Let me give you a perfect 20th century example to prove that the Inquisition still exists. It just wears a lab coat. Dr. Jonas Salk.
Wait, Jonas Salk, the man who invented the polio vaccine.
That's the one.
He's a literal hero of humanity who saved millions of children from paralysis. How does he fall into the trap of Law 38?
Salk fell into the exact mental trap you just described. He believed that because he was operating in the realm of pure objective science, and because his work was undeniably saving millions of lives, he had somehow transcended the petty need for politics, social protocol, and the mask.
He thought his objective truth, the vaccine itself, exempted him from the behavioral rules of the scientific herd.
Exactly.
Okay, so if we view the scientific community as his Sparta, what specific Spartan rules did he break?
The scientific community has intense, rigid, unwritten rules. It operates with its own form of religious orthodoxy, centered around humility, peer review, and shared credit.
Okay.
Salk broke almost all of them. In his frantic rush to get the vaccine out to the public, he went directly to the media with his discovery before properly, officially presenting it to the established scientific community through the traditional channels.
Oh, that's a big no-no.
Furthermore, during his massive press conferences, he absorbed the lion's share of the credit, failing to adequately acknowledge all the other researchers, virologists, and scientists who had painstakingly paved the way for his breakthrough over the preceding decades.
He essentially allowed himself to become a mainstream celebrity star.
He became a pop culture icon. He was doing magazine covers and television interviews, which traditional scientists notoriously despise.
He was wearing the Persian robes, but in this case, the Persian robes were the flashbulbs of the paparazzi.
That is the perfect analogy. And the consequence was swift and brutal. The general public absolutely adored him. They threw literal ticker tape parades for him.
But the scientific community, his actual peers, the people who controlled his day-to-day professional life, peer review, and grant money, shunned him completely.
They viewed his media-friendly behavior as a massive, arrogant sign of disrespect for their community's sacred orthodoxies.
Because he made the other scientists feel inferior. He was basically saying, I don't need your peer review boards, I have the adulation of the world.
And they punished him for that perceived contempt. His naive belief that his objective, life-saving success would shield him cost him dearly.
He was left totally isolated within his own profession.
He wasted years, even decades, trying to heal the breach with his colleagues. He struggled immensely to secure funding and cooperation for his later vital research on HIV.
His career trajectory was permanently handicapped simply because he refused to wear the expected mask of scientific humility. He forgot the double-bottomed coffer.
Salk is the modern Pausanias. He had the truth, but he didn't manage the optics, and he got eaten by the wolves of academia.
So let's look for the success story. Who is the modern Campanella? Who is the 20th century figure who faced a modern, terrifying inquisition and successfully danced their way out of it by wearing the mask?
For the ultimate modern masterclass in camouflage, we turn to the playwright Bertolt Brecht.
Okay.
In 1947, Brecht was subpoenaed to appear before the House Un-American Activities Committee, widely known as HUAC.
Oh, wow. The Red Scare.
This was the absolute fever pitch of the Red Scare in Hollywood. The U.S. government was aggressively hauling writers, actors, and directors into these highly publicized, intimidating hearings, demanding to know if they harbored communist sympathies.
And we need to emphasize that this was a genuine, terrifying career death sentence. If you were blacklisted by HUAC, you could not work in the American film industry.
Your livelihood was destroyed, your reputation was ruined, and some even went to prison.
Now, many of the writers who were called before the committee had decided to play the martyr. They made a point of angrily attacking the committee members, loudly refusing to answer questions, and acting as belligerently as possible, believing they were making a grand, historical stand for free speech and the First Amendment.
And those martyrs were subsequently destroyed, they were blacklisted, their lives were shattered, and their ability to create art was taken from them.
But Brecht approached this modern inquisition with incredible, calculating canniness.
The deep irony of the situation is that unlike many of the Hollywood writers, who were just vague, idealistic liberals, Brecht had actually worked steadfastly and actively for the communist cause for years.
He was the exact ideological enemy the committee was desperately hunting for.
Yes. So how does a literal communist survive a communist witch hunt without lying under oath or getting thrown in jail?
He doesn't yell at them. He doesn't pound the table about his First Amendment rights. He executes the Campanella strategy perfectly.
It begins before he even speaks a word. It starts with the fleece. Brecht was a European bohemian. He famously wore threadbare, unkempt clothing to signal his working-class solidarity. But for the HUAC hearing, he completely abandons his usual look.
He puts on a sharp, conservative, well-tailored suit. He physically dresses in the uniform of the American establishment.
He adopts the outward appearance of the herd. And there's specific detail about a cigar, right?
Yes, the cigar is a stroke of psychological genius. He deliberately brought a cigar to the proceedings and made a point of calmly smoking it while testifying.
That's amazing.
He had done his research and discovered that one of the key, most aggressive committee members had an absolute passion for cigars.
Oh, brilliant.
By smoking one, Brecht was establishing a subconscious tribal connection. He was silently communicating, "Look, we share the same refined tastes. I am a gentleman, just like you."
It's pure calculated theater. It's ego validation disguised as a smoking habit.
And when they actually start grilling him with these terrifying questions about his political affiliations, he doesn't plead the fifth, which makes you look guilty, but he doesn't confess either.
He answers them with these incredibly ambiguous, polite, philosophical generalities that completely defy easy interpretation.
Right.
When asked about his writing, he would analyze the translation of German syntax into English, obfuscating the political meaning behind dense linguistic theory.
He talked in endless, confusing circles, but he did it with the utmost respect and deference to the committee's authority.
It was a verbal dance of orthodoxy. He flattered their authority, he thoroughly confused their intellects, and ultimately he charmed them.
The committee members essentially gave up, shrugged their shoulders, thanked him for his cooperative time, and let him walk right out the door scot-free.
He survived the Inquisition. While the men who screamed about truth and justice went to prison, the actual communist quietly packed his bags and left the country on his own terms.
But Brecht's ability to utilize the double-bottomed coffer was so masterful, he deployed it on both sides of the Iron Curtain. He leaves America and eventually settles in communist East Germany,
where he immediately encounters the exact opposite Inquisition. Now the actual communists are in power, and the strict Marxist state censors are reviewing his plays.
And they criticize his work for being too decadent, too complex, and too pessimistic. They demand pure, simple, uplifting socialist realism.
So the Americans thought he was too communist, and the communists think he isn't communist enough.
But Brecht does not fight for his artistic integrity. He doesn't argue with the censors. He smiles, he nods agreeably, and he makes tiny, superficial changes to the live performance scripts just to appease their egos.
You want the lighting brighter and the ending slightly more upbeat. Absolutely, comrade.
But simultaneously, he quietly ensures that his original complex texts are published exactly as he wrote them.
He maintains the false bottom for the censors watching the stage, but preserves the real treasure in the printed book for history.
While Salk's naive rebellion ruined his daily life in a free society, Brecht proved that by mastering the mask, he was actually more powerful than the massive, oppressive forces of state repression on both sides of the globe.
So far, we have examined Law 38 purely as a defensive mechanism.
We've explored how to survive an inquisition, how to avoid being blacklisted, and how to keep from starving in a temple.
But this law is not merely a shield. It is also an incredibly potent sword. It is highly offensive.
If you want to gain real power, if you harbor ambitions to lead the herd, you must look and sound like the herd. People will fundamentally refuse to follow a leader who makes them feel alienated, confused, or inferior.
We see this offensive application constantly in modern politics. The art of feigning the common touch.
It is the ultimate playbook for leaders who hail from elite aristocratic backgrounds. Look at historical figures like Julius Caesar, Franklin D. Roosevelt, or Otto von Bismarck.
These were men born into unimaginable wealth, privilege, and aristocratic isolation.
By all logical rights, the common working people should have despised them as out-of-touch, elitist overlords.
But they didn't. FDR is widely beloved by the working class. Julius Caesar's legions adored him. Why? Because they mastered the psychology of the mask.
They understood that the masses don't need you to actually live like them. They just need you to validate them through symbolic gestures.
They cultivated a meticulously manufactured familiarity with the common man. They would make sure they were seen eating the local cheap street food.
They would sprinkle local colloquial slang into their polished speeches.
They would enthusiastically participate in common folk festivals. These gestures create a powerful cognitive dissonance in the minds of the masses.
The commoners see this billionaire eating a hot dog or using their slang, and instead of seeing it as pandering, their egos are immensely flattered.
The logic goes, deep down, despite his immense wealth and power, he shares my values. He is one of us.
The ego validation overrides the critical thinking. So if we strip away the politics and the emperors, how does the listener apply this offensively in their own life?
Good question.
I look at this mechanic and I see the ultimate, if slightly ruthless, networking tool. The logical extension of Law 38 is developing the chameleon-like ability to be all things to all people.
That is the precise, practical application. When you enter society, whether you're walking into a high-stakes networking event, pitching a new client, or trying to integrate into a new social circle, you consciously leave your own ideas, your own rigid values, and your ego at the door.
You assess the room, you identify the prevailing orthodoxy of that specific group, and you put on the mask that perfectly mirrors their beliefs.
I can hear people physically cringing at that advice. It sounds inherently inauthentic. It sounds like being a total, unprincipled hypocrite. We're taught to stand for something.
It feels uncomfortable until you fully grasp the psychology behind why it is so effective and why it is necessary for gaining influence.
People eagerly swallow the bait because it deeply flatters their ego to believe that you, a smart, capable, successful person, share their exact ideas.
It validates their worldview, and if you execute it carefully, they will not perceive you as a hypocrite.
Because they don't actually know what you stand for. You haven't revealed your inner coffer to them.
You are simply acting as a mirror, reflecting their own light, their own biases, and their own brilliance back at them. And people love nothing more than looking in the mirror.
Precisely. As Green notes in the text, they will not see you as a person lacking in values. In their eyes, you do have values. You have their values.
At least you possess their values for the duration of time you are in their company.
Bismarck played this exact game for decades to unify Germany. He would sit with the liberals in one room and passionately agree with their reforms, and an hour later, he would sit with the conservatives and lament the loss of tradition.
There were always a few sharp, cynical observers who vaguely understood what he was up to, but he was so charming and his validation felt so good that it didn't clearly matter enough to anyone to stop him.
It is the ultimate chameleon act.
But this brings up a massive existential question. I have to challenge the entire premise of living this way. Is there ever a point where you can just take the mask off?
Is there a finish line?
Yeah, a level of success where you can finally just be your authentic self in public. Or are we doomed to wear this heavy, suffocating fleece forever?
The source material does acknowledge an exception. It outlines what Robert Greene calls the reversal of the law.
Okay, so there is an out.
There is a specific time when it is safe to let the mask slip, to flaunt your true colors. But the conditions required to do so are incredibly strict. You can only safely stand out and flaunt your differences when you have already achieved a completely, unequivocally unshakable position of power.
Unshakable, meaning you are so high up the mountain that they literally cannot touch you no matter how offended they get.
Exactly. When you reside at the absolute peak of the power structure, displaying your difference is no longer perceived as a threat to the herd. It is seen as a stark reminder of the vast, unbridgeable distance between you and everyone else.
It ceases to be an insult and becomes a raw flex of dominance.
The text provides a wild, almost unbelievable example of this with Lyndon B. Johnson.
Oh man, LBJ.
When LBJ was the President of the United States, the most powerful man on earth, he would occasionally force his aides and cabinet members to continue having policy meetings with him while he sat on the toilet with the bathroom door wide open.
Which is horrifying and degrading on a personal level, but psychologically it is pure, unadulterated power dynamics.
Since absolutely no one else in the world could or would claim such a bizarre, offensive privilege, Johnson was physically demonstrating to his staff that he did not have to observe the basic protocols and niceties that bind normal human beings.
He was silently asserting, I am the president. The standard rules of civilization no longer apply to me.
The Roman Emperor Caligula executed the exact same reversal, but cranked the dial up to 11.
He would receive important, high-ranking senators and visiting dignitaries while wearing a woman's negligee or sometimes just a bathrobe.
He famously went so far as to flaunt his disdain for the political system by having his literal horse elected as a political consul.
But we have to issue a severe warning here, because even at the absolute top of the hierarchy, executing the reversal is incredibly dangerous.
Right, I was just going to point out that Caligula's flaunting did not end well for him.
Not at all.
The people and the Senate absolutely loathed him for those gestures. It felt like he was constantly, deliberately humiliating them.
And eventually that accumulated resentment brought about his assassination and the overthrow of his regime. So it proves that even an emperor isn't truly untouchable forever.
Which proves the ultimate wisdom of the law. Even those who attain the absolute highest heights of power would be much better off at least affecting the common touch, like FDR or Caesar.
Because power is fluid. It ebbs and flows.
At some point, gravity takes hold, and you may suddenly find yourself needing popular support to survive a crisis. If you spent your time on top humiliating the herd and flaunting your eccentricities, the wolves will eagerly be waiting to tear you apart the moment you stumble.
Okay, so achieving total power is one exception, but it's highly risky. Is there any other path? Is there any other role in society that allows you to get away with being different? What about the comedians, the artists, the satirists?
Yes, there is one final, highly specific exception. There is always a place in society for the gadfly.
The gadfly.
This is the individual who successfully defies custom and openly, publicly mocks what has grown lifeless, hypocritical, or overly rigid in a culture.
Oscar Wilde is the classic textbook example of this role.
He is. Oscar Wilde gained immense social power and celebrity precisely by making it abundantly clear that he disdained the usual, boring, moralistic ways of Victorian society.
When he gave public readings or attended high society dinner parties, his audiences didn't just expect him to insult their culture, they actively welcomed it.
They paid handsomely for the privilege of being mocked by him.
But the text is very quick to throw a wet blanket on anyone listening who thinks they can just adopt the persona of the gadfly.
Because to pull that off successfully, you need an incredibly unusual, once-in-a-generation genius.
If you do not possess Wilde's specific transcendent gift to amuse and delight people with language, your barbs aren't going to be received as witty satire.
They are just going to offend people. You won't look like a brilliant social critic. You will just look like an arrogant jerk.
And even with his towering, undeniable genius, we have to remember the tragic arc of his story, his eccentric role, his absolute refusal to wear the mask of Victorian morality when it truly counted, eventually destroyed him.
He was put on trial, imprisoned, publicly disgraced, and died broken in exile.
So even the most successful, brilliant gadfly eventually gets swatted by the herd.
Which brings us full circle, right back to the core thesis of Law 38.
So let's distill all of this down for you, the listener. What are the key takeaways from this massive journey across history, from ancient Sparta to 1950s Hollywood?
Number 1. Total free expression in public is a myth.
It is a dangerous trap that will inevitably lead to your isolation. To survive and thrive in any group, you must keep your differences locked securely in your thoughts and not displayed in your fleece.
Number 2. Disguise your originality. Build the double-bottomed coffer for your own mind.
Place the conventional ideas, the polite agreements, and the expected behaviors on the top shelf to keep the herd calm and feeling validated.
Share your true treasure, your radical ideas, only with a tolerant, discreet, highly valued few who have proven they can handle the real you.
And number 3, as we learned from the masterful maneuvers of Campanella and Brecht, use the mask to your active advantage.
Outward conformity is not a sign of submission. It is the ultimate active camouflage.
It gives you the necessary time, space, and safety to execute your real plans and think your real thoughts, totally unhindered by the judgment of the crowd.
I think the most resonant summary of this entire deep dive is the biblical quote provided in the text.
It perfectly captures the profound danger of unguarded authenticity in a world driven by ego.
Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you.
Guard your pearls. But as we wrap up this deep dive into the mechanics of conformity and power, I want to leave you with one final, lingering question to ponder on your own.
It's a big one.
It's something that builds directly on everything we've talked about today, but flips the perspective inward. We have spent this entire time focusing on the external, social, and strategic benefits of wearing the mask.
We've proven historically that it keeps you alive, it gets you funded, it prevents you from being blacklisted, and it gains you power.
But what is the internal psychological toll of this strategy? If you spend decades mastering the art of acting like everyone else, if you spend your whole life feigning agreement, nodding at fools, and successfully sipping the mad water just to fit in, does the mask eventually become your face?
By hiding your true thoughts so successfully from the world for so long, do you run the terrifying risk of eventually hiding them from yourself?
It is a chilling thought to end on. Guard your coffer, but make absolutely sure you do not lose the key to the false bottom. Stay curious, stay sharp, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.